Welcome to the edition of Boxing Info. I'm your host, the Islander, and I'm going to do a couple of things on this show. One, obviously, I want to recap the Nicholas Walters and Vasil Lomachenko fight, but I'm gonna go back to Andre Ward and Sergey Kovalev just for a few minutes because I got to watch that fight uh, on HBO replay. Uh, when I watched on the internet, it was through like a foreign feed. I don't know if it was Barry McGuigan or Jim Watt calling that fight from the British end, and I've got a couple of anecdotes, and I want to specifically address some of your comments on my last video about this. Listen, when I watched the replay, and I want you all to turn your volumes down now. You've been given a fair warning. Um, the first thing, hold on, why is it only showing like my? Okay. Um, Anyhow, getting back to what I was saying about that fight, I thought the same thing watching it in replay. The only thing that, as far as HBO is concerned, is, and again, turn your volumes down, is how much are they going to really suck Andre Ward's dick? I mean, I'm just asking that. Don't be offended. I don't mean that literally, but they've always been biased. But at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, can you get? I had an article published one time by a newspaper back in 1990 when Jim Lampley and Sugar Ray Leonard, along with Larry Merchant, were calling the Julio Cesar Chavez Meldrick Taylor St. Patrick's Day fight. Even back then, when I was 20 years old, I was 19. I wasn't even 20 yet. I could see how absolutely disgusting Jim Lampley is. I mean, but irregardless, I still, even with them coddling Andre Ward's testicles, I still thought Kovalev won the fight watching their broadcast of it. Now, let me address a couple of things with this because, again, this isn't as egregious a decision as I thought that Pacquiao and Timothy Bradley was in the first fight, or even Dwight Muhammad Qawi against Ozzy Ocasio, which was terrible. I mean, a non-title fight. Uh, Dirk Diggler, number 3, put a comment on my last video. You have been a loyal subscriber and contributor to the Boxing Info community, and I have total respect for your opinions. But I want to address this comment and this question about, or it's more of a comment about taking the title away from the champion crap, or however you label that it's not important. Let me grant you this, Dirk Diggler. You are right. It usually is not important. For the past 30 years, when there's been 17, basically boxing has migrated into 17 different weight divisions, 4 titles per weight division. You could basically buy a title. You don't even have to win one anymore. There is almost no lineage anymore in boxing. You stand correct with that assessment. But there's a very big difference with this fight. And let me tell you why. And I was telling one of the guys here in the office who doesn't watch boxing. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Sergey Kovalev isn't just any titleist, paper champion titleist. He's got 3/4 of all the titles in the division. Now, Adonis Stevenson or Don King, working on part of Adonis Stevenson, does not want to fight Kovalev, or they don't want to make the fight, or they're pricing themselves out of the fight, or whatever the case may be. He is truly a champion the way the word was used way back 30, 50, 60 years ago. Kovalev, in a lot of people's estimation, even though he may not have been the man who beat the man because Stevenson holds lineage of some way, shape, or form, recognized as a true champion of the civilized world, as they used to say in the old Rocky movies. So this notion of Andre Ward having to take his title actually does hold water in this instance. And when you have a guy, and again, I'm talking to all of you in general now, when you have a guy that is the recognized champion of the division, basically dictating the fight, coming forward, landing the harder punches, doing the damage. I understand, again, and Dirk Diggler made a point of the CompuBox can't be used, and I absolutely agree with that. That one guy can land 1,000 feather punches on another guy, and another guy scores a knockdown with one punch. When let's use a gross example of what we're talking about. One guy scores 1,000 feather type punches that do absolutely no damage to the other guy, but fighter B scores one punch per round and scores one knockdown per round with that punch. So he's landed a grand total of 12 punches throughout the fight. Does the guy who's landed 1,000 feather shots win, or does the guy who scored 12 knockdowns win? I mean, I'm not disagreeing with any of you, but I'm just using a gross exaggeration, hyperbole, okay, as that was taught to us in school. Back when school was worth something. In any event, what I'm saying is, yes, I agree with most of that comment. I take issue with the part of the fight, the title's got to be taken away from the champion, because we've been so conditioned over the past, we just went through this political upheaval in the United States with this presidential election, and when my Stork JMC channel was shut down years ago, there was also another one called Stork Politico that I had, and that was shut down at the same time too. They just cleaned out all my accounts. We in the United States are divided amongst a faction, and this correlates to this whole thing with boxing and the taking the title from the champion adage that I believe in. Again, a champion is somebody special. These run-of-the-mill fighters like, say, Francisco Vargas at 130 pounds, he's not the champion, okay? He's a titleist. Your assessment, Dirk Diggler 3, applies to him. Does it apply to a unified champion? I don't think so. And this goes back to like Bernard Hopkins against Jermaine Taylor. This is why there was such outrage over, I wouldn't say outrage, but upset over, what's that noise? Over that decision. But getting back to the United States, we're a country divided right now between people who have believed and are sold in the last 24 years on something called political correctness. Political correctness and common sense cannot coexist, okay? With that said, I go back to this new wave of boxing, this globalization of boxing, this dilution of boxing that has turned me off of it. Now, obviously that dilution and that globalization, not to offend any of you, means that Europe, the UK, the United Kingdom itself has seen a renaissance in the past 15, 20 years. Eastern Europe has been opened up to boxing over the past 20-something years. And these two things go hand in hand. I'm just making a comparison between the state of boxing and the state of the United States right now with these two schools of thought. Obviously, I subscribe to the common sense version of it. I remember what it was like when common sense actually ruled. That applies to boxing. Now, again, I'm going to give this example. Did Andre Ward take Kovalev's championship? Not his title, not his paper title, his championship. And the answer is no. And I'm going to, not to spend I've already spent 8.5 minutes on this, but I'm going to belabor it a little bit more. Guy that sits in the office down the way here has told me, he comes in on Monday morning, he flipped on HBO. Now, I'm telling you this because please listen carefully to what I'm going to say. He asked me, he goes, who did you think won that fight? I was like, oh, Kovalev did. He goes, well, I only saw the fight. Now, listen to this. I only saw the fight from round 6 to the end, is what he tells me. I was like, well, who'd you think won? Thinking he's going to say Ward. He goes, oh, the Russian guy. I was like, what? He goes, yeah, easily the Russian guy. And I was like, just on round 6 through 12, I was like, you understand that was the best part of the fight for him. He goes, look, I used to watch boxing 35, 40 years ago, when Hagler and Leonard and Muhammad Ali were fighting. He goes, and this isn't boxing anymore. And I was like, no, I understand that. So I started thinking about this, and we started talking about it, because we've had a big discussion about the sport of baseball with the umpires and calling balls and strikes. And the decision was so questionable that I noticed that Max Kellerman had to do like an editorial at the end of the evening or the end of the fight about them watching it and rescoring it as spectators. Let me give again this comment by Dirk Diggler hit a nerve, because not that I disagree with all of it, I disagree with only part of it. Harold Letterman scored the fight. What do you have it? 8 rounds to 4 for Kovalev or something of that nature. All right, that may have been a stretch, but remember what Max Kellerman said. It could easily have been 116-112 Kovalev through 115-113 Andre Ward and 114-113 Andre Ward, or 115-112 or one. I don't know what he said. I was just kind of halfway paying attention to what Kellerman was saying. The scores fit in that spectrum, is what he was saying. Okay, fine. I've spoken to Harold Letterman several times. He found me on the old channel with the 5 Greatest Mexican Fighters video a long time ago. He and I have been in contact. I haven't spoken to him in a few years, but he and I have talked for a long time on the phone. I asked him one time, I said, when you're calling fights for HBO, are you watching with your eyes through the ropes and watching the action as if you're one of the 3 judges sitting on different sides of the ring watching it, or are you watching it on a monitor in front of you? He said, I'm watching it through the ropes. So, with that said, and by the way, he said that Lampley and Merchant and Kellerman and Roy Jones and Lennox Lewis and George Foreman, whoever else was doing color commentary, that they've got flat screen displays, big flat screen displays. So they're seeing what we're seeing, as well as being able to take a look up in the ring every so often. With that said, Harold Letterman scored that fight for Kovalev with the same exact vantage point that the official judges had. He was on one side of the ring. The other 3 sides of the ring were the 3 blind mice. I'm saying that facetiously. They're not really blind. Let's be clear. I disagree with their scores, but it was not egregious. So I've come up with this thought as we were arguing here in the office about umpires and balls and strikes, that an article came out that the Major League Baseball umpires are correct on balls and strikes 80% of the time. I'm thinking to myself, 80% of the time? That means they're wrong basically 1 out of every 5 times. That a pitch is called a ball that really is a strike, or vice versa. So I think really what should be done with boxing now, that there seems to be a trend, and this is why I think, again, the UFC and MMA keeps gaining ground on boxing. I think what really should happen is that in the arena, the judges are all separated, or they could be all together, it does not matter, and they're put in a room that is heavily guarded by the athletic commissioner and law enforcement. And each one of them has a big, giant, flat panel display in front of them, which has a closed circuit feed of what's going on inside the arena, the same way we see it at home. And they are forced to judge the fight on what they see from every angle. Because I am telling you, as somebody who's been to World Championship fights, that even if you have good seats, what it looks like being there in person and what it looks like on TV when you get home and watch it when somebody's recorded it for you are 2 entirely different things. So I think boxing should be judged by 3 judges who are sitting in a very quiet room with no disturbance and no interference from anybody, watching a flat screen panel, all their own private panel, and scoring the fight, and then their cards are sent into the arena to be read off as the official decision. Because if at that time we have controversy after they get to see multiple camera angles and stuff like that, we'll know that there's collusion or corruption or whatever else is going on in it. I'm not claiming this is the case with this fight. I just think that when you have 2 undefeated fighters vying for possibly the top spot of pound for pound in the world, and basically multi-titles in one division, which is basically what I call, and this is one of the original 8 weight classes, which is one of the reasons why I've gotten worked up over this. I think that they need to strongly consider that, because I don't think sitting on one side of the ring and looking at the backs of 2 fighters who are fighting along the ropes on the other side of the ring could ever be judged as fairly as watching it on TV as we do. And that's all I'm going to say about that for 14 and a half minutes. Now, that brings us to the fight that did happen on Saturday night that I was looking forward to and was gravely disappointed with. And that was Vasyl Lomachenko's successful title defense of his WBO 130-pound title against Nicholas Walters. And I usually have some sort of mishap in my predictions. I think I predicted that Lomachenko was going to stop Walters either middle or late or win a clear-cut decision. That's not what I'm getting on about, going on about. What's eerily crazy about what I said in my preview video was that Nicholas Walters, after the fight, claims that he quit because he hadn't fought in nearly a year and couldn't get his punches off. I think there is some truth to that, but in any event, the fight was dominated by Lomachenko, and I agree with the HBO guys. The athletic contest was long over when Walters quit in his corner, and don't know if this would have been any different at 126 pounds, because one of the things that Walters has had in when he has risen to the top and ascended to the top in 2014 was that his two most notable wins are against former flyweight champions, who basically Darchinian and Nonito Donaire were by far at their best at 112 pounds, and he got them at 126 pounds, where he is a huge, huge presence as far as a guy who probably balloons up well close to 140 pounds, or I'd say 135 easily after the weigh-in, and they had no way of hurting him. He did not have that advantage over Lomachenko, who is naturally a 126, 130 pound fighter. And I, in no way, shape, or form, thought that this fight would be dominated the way it was, because it did look eerily similar to, as I was saying in the preview show, to the fight between Andrew Sixheads Lewis and James Page, where James Page was dangerous in theory, just like Nicholas Walters. Dangerous in theory. When Lomachenko in the 6th and 7th round started standing in front of Walters and hitting him, landing as many punches, and it looked like with the naked eye, as Walters was throwing, I was beginning to wonder whether Lomachenko could get Walters off his feet. Now, of course, we're all disappointed with him quitting, but I understand where he's coming from. The athletic contest was over, like HBO said. And where do we go from here? There was talk before the fight that Bob Arum might try to make a fight between Lomachenko and Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao's basically at the end of his career. Lomachenko's ascending to the top of the pound-for-pound rankings. Do I think that's a fight that could be made? It can be made. How competitive will it be? I think that depends on how well Lomachenko takes a punch, because one of the things that I will stress about this is that Manny Pacquiao is murder on fellow southpaws. His money punch is far closer to their bodies or their heads. And every time he has fought a southpaw, even when he's had trouble earlier in his career, the end of those fights are devastating, because they can't get away from his left hand, and he doesn't have to disguise it. He's in the pocket. It's almost like he's fighting the entire fight in the pocket. Now, Lomachenko, obviously, look, Lomachenko hits harder than it looks. It looks like he's just tapping guys, but he was hurting Nicholas Walters in the 7th round with shots that don't look like, because they're very precisely planted. And what I would like to see is how Pacquiao responds to getting hit as often as he would be getting hit by Lomachenko. HBO is speculating at 138 pounds, 135, 138, does not matter. I think it's a very, I would give Pacquiao a slight edge, but I think it's a pick'em fight, and I think the more dangerous fight for Lomachenko would be against Terence Crawford, because I personally think Terence Crawford quietly might be the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. And I'll do a preview for his fight coming up, which is going to be an absolute destruct and destroy walkover against what is it, John Molina Jr. It's basically going to be terrible. But it'll be competitive for a few rounds, and it's going to be absolute blowout. That's going to do it for this show. I don't know if there's anything coming this weekend that needs to be previewed, but if I think of something, I'll make another video. Thanks, everybody.